Hey, it's Friday, and it is Friday amidst the Trans Rights Readathon, which has been going on all week. And if you haven't popped over for any of the reading I've been doing yet, which admittedly is less than I have intended because I haven't been feeling super well this week. I've been dealing with some sinus stuff, which has impacted my focus, but I'm really hoping to kick it more into gear for the weekend. But I started with The Wicked Bargain by Gabe Cole-Novoa, and that is what we're going to talk about today. But to talk about the readathon a little bit more at the outset, just in case you haven't heard about what's going on, it has been organized, the readathon, by Sim Kern, author and book talker. It started on Book Talk, and it really arose as a response to all of the anti-trans legislation we have been seeing forwarded across the country. And so it is also a decentralized fundraiser. So I'm going to link some charities below. I am directly fundraising for Brave Space Alliance. If you go over to my Instagram, there is an ongoing fundraiser over there, as well as the donation will be linked below. But additionally, I would love it if you would consider donating to funds that benefit trans Hoosiers. I found a couple of charities, or a handful of charities, through Indiana Youth Group, which is an organization I worked with way back in the day when I was in school in relation to, I paired with them on Spring Awakening, a production of Spring Awakening, and we raised money for them during that production, only to say that I trust them. So they have some resources on their page, and I believe I will link at least one charity below. The other two are medical institutions. So I absolutely still encourage you to donate to them, and I will link them, but I don't know if there's a way to kind of mark the funds you are contributing for specifically trans healthcare. It may be an option, but just to let you know. So that's the gist behind the readathon. It is many sides of the bookish internet getting together, kind of banding together to celebrate trans storytelling, to bring some joy, to uplift trans authors in a time where things are not really very good right now. So in that vein, let's talk about a story, and we're going to be talking about The Wicked Bargain by Gabe Cole-Novoa. Now, I'm pretty sure in the last week this has kind of blown up on TikTok because I believe the audiobook is read by one of the actors from Our Flag Means Death. Now, I am admittedly one of the handful of people that have not watched Our Flag Means Death. I could not subscribe to another platform at the time. So I have not seen it, but by all accounts, it makes sense to link that show with this book because we have pirates. Additionally here though, we have magic and deals with the devil. And indeed we actually start or open on a deal with the devil, or the end of a deal with the devil. El Diablo, I should say. And we are in the midst of a storm at sea, and Mar, our protagonist, is kind of trying to figure out where their father is amidst all this. Their father's the captain. Why isn't he kind of wrangling the crew for this storm? So they go looking for him, and they find him drunk in his cabin. And Mar is kind of like, what is going on? Get it together. There is a storm. And Mar's father is a very notable pirate, a legendary pirate, so to say. And instead of kind of getting it together and going to help save them from this storm, he starts kind of drunkenly rambling about this story that he's told Mar before. And the story is basically that he sold his soul to the devil in order to get this acclaim, but to more importantly, save Mar's life. And Mar is kind of like, this is the rum talking, which is extra interesting because Mar has magic. So you think that they would be a little bit more primed to kind of give some credence to this, especially kind of being out on sea, these kind of superstitions, this kind of vastness to everything. But they're like, no, devils aren't real. This is the rum. And instead the devil shows up and takes Mar's father, and part of the bargain was for his crew, for the captain's crew. And so the devil takes the captain and basically condemns the rest of the crew, including Mar, to death. So Mar tries to save the crew with their magic, and does at one point, and then the storm steps in. So nature wins out, so to say, even if it is supernaturally induced nature, and sinks the boat. And the next we catch up with Mar, they've been rescued and brought onto another pirate ship. And this is set in 1820, and it's kind of at the end of the age of pirates. So there are not a whole lot of pirates operating within the Caribbean at the time, but there are still a few, and the few that do operate have kind of reputations. And Mar's father had a reputation. So when the captain hears that the ship sank, he's flabbergasted. He doesn't really know what to make of it, but he brings Mar into the crew, especially because the captain's son, Bass, is kind of angling for this. However, now Mar is a cabin boy instead of the child of the captain, and so they are kind of sent on these errands, like grabbing coffee for Bass, until the captain runs into them when they're running this errand at one point and is like, Bass doesn't even drink coffee, why is he sending you on this errand? And Mar doesn't know why, because Mar is lovable but bad at recognizing flirting at first. And so they are dealing with being in this completely new environment, dealing with the grief of losing their father and their family, their crew, including Leo, who basically raised them as a second father after the death of their mother. And they're also dealing with the fact that they have to hide their magic in a way that they haven't had to in the past, because on their ship, everyone knew them. They knew about their magic and they were able to kind of let it out. And there is this sense that if it builds up the magic too much, there are going to be repercussions for Mar. Additionally, Mar is trying to navigate a crew that isn't as familiar with their gender and making sure that their bindings remain intact and that their shirts cover both their bindings and their tattoos that are symbols of their magic or can reveal their magic. So there is a lot of trying to remain hidden for Mar in this new environment, but they are still seen, and unfortunately they are seen by the devil, who realizes they are not dead. And so El Diablo offers Mar a deal to save their father before the next full moon, and Mar wants no part of this. And so they spend a lot of the book kind of running from these deals and their power, even as a demon starts to kind of pop up and needle them and try to get them to think about their magic, to think about this deal, to think about rescue in some way. And they are more of a nuisance for Mar, even as Mar is very jealous of their ability to change their gender presentation basically every time that they see them. But Mar is trying to navigate this grief while making the sacrifice mean something. Additionally, the pirates are kind of living within the political landscape of the time and assisting revolutionaries against the Spanish government and Spanish occupiers. And so there is a lot going on all tied together here. And it is a lot on the pirate ship. And I really enjoyed it exploring the community that is established on these ships. While we don't really get to know a whole lot of the crew, which I think makes sense, we're still keeping the narrative pretty tight. We have this sense of bustle without having to spread ourselves too thin in terms of relationships, especially because we are really focusing on Bass and that kind of relationship, and Bass being able to kind of pull Mar out of their shell. Bass is just kind of irreverent and witty and quippy in that way that he is definitely flirting with Mar, even if Mar doesn't necessarily pick up on that right away, but it is also helping Mar let their guard down because he's able to kind of needle Mar in a way that Mar responds. And so even if it's a response born out of annoyance, it is still a response, especially because Mar spends a lot of the time on the ship trying to hide their magic, and the first time they try to kind of alleviate the pressure of this magic, they get caught. And so they spend a lot of time worrying if Tito, the man who catches them, is going to turn them in. And so there's this sense, especially with the deal, that there's kind of this clock ticking down. And in some ways, we're really not coming up against that deadline until the end, when things kind of snowball and the political situation of everything comes into play in a way that puts the crew at risk and forces Mar to kind of get involved and make a decision, especially as they have become closer to Bass, and Bass has an emotional stake in the crew as well. Not that Mar doesn't, but this is Bass's family. So Mar is watching him kind of have to face the reality that Mar already knows. And so it forces Mar's hand a little bit and forces them to come to terms with their magic in a way. And a lot of this book is about kind of exploring and facing your own power, claiming your own power. And so it can feel for much of the narrative like Mar is running from this power, ignoring it, is very reactionary, because they are. They are being forced into this place of reacting because they are not taking action. We are getting them to a point of taking action, and it's about stepping into that and claiming their own, which makes total sense, especially from a young adult narrative, kind of figuring out where your power lies, that you don't have to be subject to these larger forces. And in this case, these larger forces are pretty large. You've got a whole government kind of bearing down on you, and you've got the literal devil. So in a landscape where we're very used to teens taking on these large quests, which is fun, I will admit, this reads a little bit more true, even if, you know, like all the swashbuckling maybe feels a little outside of the realm of the possible, sure, but the kind of instinct to hide is well rooted, especially because Mar is afraid of their magic, and there is a very real reason for that. When they were young, they let their magic out. They were experimenting with their magic as children do because they were a child at the time, and they were happened on by some of the Spanish occupiers of the island who immediately called them a demon and pointed a gun in their face. And so when their mother rushed to their protection and died in the process, Mar didn't know how to handle those emotions because they were a child, and their magic is related to fire in particular, and they set off a nearby volcano, which wiped out the town. So there's this kind of block born of trauma that Mar really doesn't want to engage with. And then there were times that it didn't feel like we fully dove into that, but we were very much still exploring the emotions and repercussions of that. The tone definitely wasn't cozy. This was a pirate book. There was death, there was destruction, but it also felt like it was positioned in a really interesting spot in terms of the kind of bridge between middle grade and young adult, because Mar, as our protagonist, is 16, even if they claim they're 15 because they look a little younger, it feels like it's a narrative about stepping into your own, and the voice and the tone really feel like they fit in that kind of sweet spot for younger YA, which I know that professionals in the YA space, librarians especially, have been really calling for teens. And while our protagonist here, particularly Mar, is 16, I know that when I was a teenager, I liked to read about people older than me. So I don't think that that is outside of the realm of the possible. So I do think it would appeal to older teens as well, but I definitely think it would appeal to younger teens that are just creeping into the young adult space, making that transition from middle grade to young adult. That being said, I am not a professional children's librarian or have any degrees in children's literature, so that is more observational than based in study. But I think, especially because there are romantic subplots here, right? We have Bass flirting with Mar, there is hand-holding at the end, we get a Disney Channel kiss, but it's nothing that feels like it's overshadowing the narrative. Mar is still really driving this, even if they're sitting in the back seat for the first half, because that's where their character development needs them to sit. Now, that doesn't really make sense for a boat. I should have picked a boat metaphor, but I'm not a boat person, so that's what you get. But we get that kind of joy of first crush, this kind of, are they flirting with me? I don't know, even if as readers we definitely know. But it's not a romance that really overshadows, and it's just as much about Mar being able to find someone that sees them so clearly without Mar having to tell them exactly who they are. And there is something very beautiful in that, and Mar's reaction to just offhanded comments from Bass, and how much those offhanded comments mean to Mar. The real power of the flirt, right? So we definitely have this magic kind of wrapped up in this world that Mar is trying to navigate and figure out, even if we don't delve too much into the particulars of that magic. We know that Mar's magic isn't coming from the devil, that it is something that they were born with, which is extra interesting because we are definitely exploring the land here, even if we are at sea, because we are touching on the tensions and the political tensions of the time, especially with a lot of the revolutions against the Spanish. There were times I definitely thought of Beverly Jenkins's romance, Destiny's Captive, because we start out in a similar kind of political climate and are looking at the revolutionaries around the same time. So that was a lot of fun, though that is very much a romance and this is very much a young adult novel. But we get to kind of explore those political realities, and I really enjoyed how Novoa talked about this in the author's note and how he approached history in this book, especially because there is a point in the book where they kind of attack a merchant ship, take the bounty of that merchant ship, and give it to the revolutionaries. But in the process, they free slaves that were being kept on that merchant ship. And Novoa talks about in his author's note that while there was precedent for this, that there were freed slaves living as pirates, he also mentioned that it was also common for pirate ships to keep those men enslaved. And so he said he didn't want to be involved in rehabilitating the images of any slaver, and so he made sure that his pirates were completely original. But we are definitely connected to the politics that were at play here, and it catches up with our characters when they are caught by the Spanish government. I mean, for being pirates as much as anything, but their connection to the revolutionaries definitely comes into play. And as we rush toward the climax, our magical and non-magical plot lines may not feel as divorced as we thought they were. Additionally, because we are exploring places impacted by Spanish colonialism, our pirates are Spanish speaking. And I really appreciate the way Spanish is woven into the book, the way it kind of comes out at really emotionally weighty moments, whether it be emotion born of sentimentality, fear, annoyance, love. There is a wide swath, but I think it is blended so well into the narrative. And I also really appreciate its exploration of gender neutral terms within a gendered language. And so in Mara's first interaction with her father, we explore the terms hije and niña, and forgive my beginner Spanish pronunciation there, I am suitably embarrassed, trust me. But we then see Mar referred to as hije, and this idea that even if a masculine pronoun isn't the complete truth for them, they align more with the masculine side, and so we see that come out in hije, which I thought was a really fascinating exploration, and I definitely should look into more of the linguistic scholarship there. The book also had a Spanish idiom at one point, a otra cosa mariposa, which I had never come across in Spanish class, and just looking at it, I knew it would be fun to say. So in looking it up, I was finding like very literal definitions, and I of course know what all of the words mean. I retain that much Spanish, I promise. But what is the kind of emotional gist of that idiom from a native speaker? Because I can kind of make educated guesses, like how does that idiom translate in spirit into English outside of the very literal? But I loved the way that these kinds of things were woven in, and we just knew the kind of tenor, the emotional tenor of them. I knew a little bit more because I at least have some rudimentary Spanish, but I thought it was just so incredibly joyful. Even without Spanish, the emotional intent of those moments is very clear in the narrative. And for those who do speak Spanish, how delightful to have it woven so naturally into the story. So I really, really appreciated that. So this book can be a little deceptive because at some points, Mar running from their power can read as inaction or reaction, or it feels like we're not being as actively driven to a point, because I think we've been kind of conditioned to kind of go on these quests and go from point to point. And here we kind of have things unraveling a little bit more naturally while also watching our protagonist be kind of annoyed on all sides. And so we are seeing a character really grow into their power and have to step into their power and make very active choices. And at first that active choice is to disengage, because that is still a choice. But we get to watch Mar grow into their power, grow into themselves, find a place in the world that is of their own making, and make their magic into something bigger and prove to themselves that their magic can be used for more than just destruction, and it doesn't always need to be hidden. So at the end of the day, this was a fun young adult narrative, and most importantly, there were pirates. So if you still have room in your TBR for the Trans Rights Readathon, I definitely think this is worth slipping in, and if not, just keep it on your TBR anyway. But thanks for hanging out and listening to my thoughts. Read something good, like and subscribe if you feel like it, and yeah, bye.